does the vote even make a difference in our everyday life?
Economic issue is coming up. It seems like it is hitting people all across the country, particularly in these battleground states.
For younger voters, are they more hopeful, entrepreneurial? What are you seeing with respect to that?
I think when you go toward the eastern part of the state, in Milwaukee particularly, you see a number of communities that still feel disconnected from the overall promise. They keep asking the question like, well, how long do we have to keep waiting? How long do we get to be the voting bloc, but then our issues never arise?
Or is it just this frustration has just been mounting over election cycles? It's going to take some bigger action for people to feel they're engaged.
How rare it is for Republicans to go into Dane County. And you said Trump visited Dane County recently, right?
Yeah, he came to Wanakee.
Hello and welcome to another episode of Crosstalk Politics. I am Joel Payne, as always, joined by my friend and my colleague, Leslie Sanchez. She is a Republican strategist. I'm a Democratic strategist. Leslie, say hello.
How you doing? Hola, we're here.
Yeah,
Let's do
good
this.
good to talk. Long time to talk. We're both a little punchy as we're getting down the stretch here, down the to election day, but nonetheless, we're very excited because we've got another great conversation on tap for today, and we are joined by a really excellent guest and somebody who has excellent experience with a state that is going to be critical to what happens this election day. That's the state of Wisconsin, which every prognosticator says will be a battleground state. And we are joined by the Honorable Everett Mitchell. He is a judge in Dane County, Wisconsin, which is the county where Madison, Wisconsin is, the state capital. He is a former candidate for the Wisconsin Supreme Court. He is a pastor. He's a community leader. He's got a law degree. I think he's a Packers fan now, too, although he's originally from Texas. So I'm not sure what his affiliation is right now. But
Dallas Cowboys, man.
Thank you. Thank you.
So we got our first agreement between Leslie and Everett on the Cowboys. There you go. But anyways, Judge Mitchell, I'll call you the Honorable Judge Mitchell. How are you doing today? Thanks so much for joining us.
And thank you, Joel. Thank you so much, Leslie, for having me on this program so we can talk about something that's important to all of us as politics and representation in this process.
For sure. Leslie, I'll maybe get us started here with the first question. Judge Mitchell, you are in an elected office right now. You're a former candidate for other office. And I imagine that gives you a unique perspective on what voters in the state are most concerned about. When you ran for the Wisconsin Supreme Court a few years ago, we know abortion was a front and center issue. I'm curious right now, what are the issues that, as you're talking to people in the community, that are really resonating and that are the most animating on the ground in the state?
I think it's really two big issues, and really it just depends on the age of the demographic that you're talking to. I think for older individuals in the community, I think they are looking for some consistency about what to expect among, voting. And, I think for younger people, it's this idea that does the vote even make a difference in our everyday life? And then there's a middle demographic that really is focused really on the economy. There are a lot of my congregation members, a lot of people when I've traveled and go throughout the state to talk about voting and what's important to people. A lot of it is, can we make a living? Can we go to the grocery store? It's just that small. Can we go to the grocery store and begin to buy the things that we need? I think for the most part, there's been a lot of narrative that, abortion still is at the center. But I think those voters are really tired of having a conversation about abortion. And they want to talk about what about the other values? What about the struggling needs that they have related to housing, the economy and food, being able to pay for childcare, being able to deal with transportation, especially in places like Wisconsin that doesn't have a robust transportation system for families to get back and forth for the things that they need. So those are the things that they're hoping, candidates talk about, especially given the kind of intense nature that many families are struggling with right now.
Leslie, I'm going to hand it off to you, but I just, as Judge Mitchell was talking about this is so resonant, right? Where everybody we're talking to, that economic issue is coming up. It seems like it is hitting people all across the country, particularly in these battleground states.
Very true. I was in Madison with Wisconsin Women in Government, which is a bipartisan effort. I was at their annual gala and saw and heard from so many who were really ready to have some bipartisanship and that kind of leadership in the state. It's so good to see the diversity of viewpoints, certainly, and trying to find that common ground. And out speaking with individuals, I heard so much echoing this economic argument. Kind of wondering how they're going to make ends meet at a time when I felt a lot of people were excited about kind of the thriving cities that were really making an impression and changing Wisconsin. How have you seen that dynamic change for young people, for younger voters? Are they more hopeful, entrepreneurial? What are you seeing with respect to that?
I think when you go toward the eastern part of the state, in Milwaukee particularly, you see a number of communities that still feel disconnected from the overall promise. And so when we talk about economics, what we're really talking about is how do we prioritize the things that those families need? How do we continue to talk about those things and not just talk about them in election cycles? And even now, they don't really hear the election cycle talking about families and violence and how do we rebuild communities? How do we invest in local economics? There are people who are thriving, but that thriving notion doesn't seem to trickle into to those very fabric of those places. I think Wisconsin is is an interesting space because strategists are needing to try to convince voters that they should be able to feel safe with one candidate over another, when, at least in my race, they spend so much time trying to convince voters that you can't support candidates statewide that are African-American who hold progressive values. And then all of a sudden, now there's a shift to try to have to bring on a candidate that has all the progressive values that they have been spending so much time, strategists spending so much time trying to convince voters that they need to be afraid of. And I think because of that, that's why Wisconsin is becoming more of a toss-up than it should be, because now they're having to convince, well, actually, the things we told you to be afraid of, don't be afraid of it because this candidate, embraces those things. So at least on the Democratic side, I think that is why there's been such a shifting and uneasiness in this space, because it's not, they're having to sell after spending years telling voters those are not the kind of people that you can vote for and that can win our state.
Yeah, Judge Mitchell, just maybe to pick up on that a little bit and to take it a little bit further. So look, we're two Black men. You are a Black man resident of Wisconsin. And one of the themes as we come down the stretch in this race is how Black men are viewing the race, particularly at the top of the ticket. A lot of effort on part of the Harris campaign to kind of batten down the hatches to secure the African-American vote. I think depending on who you talk to, some people think, oh, those voters are either going to go stay home, but they're not going to necessarily defect in large numbers to Trump. Leslie might have a different perspective on that. I'm curious, in a state like Wisconsin, where you have these two big metropolitan areas, maybe you consider Racine as another one too, but you got Milwaukee, you've got Madison, high African-American populations, lots of Black male populations. I imagine you are witnessing how that national narrative is playing out locally. Could you talk a little bit about that?
I would say, man, barbershops are a good indicator of the conversation that, Black men are having related to politics. And I think they're trying to encourage, a lot of these Black men to still prioritize voting and really see this, right? But, what you're seeing as a fallover from, the top of the ticket for the Democratic side is really a holdover from the Biden administration and what they felt about it in general. And so it is not a rejection of her. It is just a rejection for the idea that we still are waiting, right? How long do we have to keep waiting? How long do we have to keep pausing and waiting for our turn to be prioritized on the ideas that matter the most? So at least for this big cycle, we know that women's right to choice is essential because of the prominence and the power that it represents, especially having a Supreme Court decision overturned and intentionality of those groups. And so what I keep hearing for these men, they keep asking the question, well, how long do we have to keep waiting? And for many of them, they've been saying, we've been waiting since the Obama administration. We've been waiting even before then, the Clinton administration. How long do we have to keep waiting?
Everett, is it economic issues? Is it social justice? I'm curious. I
think it's a combination of the both. I think we still see social justice and the prevailing, things we keep waiting for, right? They keep waiting for, justice to be brought for criminal justice system to eradicate the disparities between crack and cocaine. We still are waiting for, states are making billions of dollars off of legalizing marijuana, but the communities that were arrested and incarcerated with 3 strikes you're out are still incarcerated. They still are suffering while, states are making $1 billion, and states all around Wisconsin are doing that. And yet people are still incarcerated, right? So they keep asking the question like, well, how long do we have to keep waiting? How long do we get to be the voting bloc, but then our issues never arise or you come? So it's this new nuanced conversation that I think because if we're not in conversation with them, we cannot reorganize to be able to say that each incremental change in the voting cycle gives us an opportunity to expand and strengthen our voting bloc a little differently. They don't feel that. They don't see that. It's nowhere to be seen in their communities, right? And because it's not seen and it's not visible, to them, it doesn't exist. It's like an invisible man.
Appreciate that. Leslie, I'll hand it back over to you.
No, I think that's a frustration that you heard. And I'm really interested that you brought up Bill Clinton, with the 3 strikes. You could talk about the crime bill with that. But with Obama, there was this question, and I remember that at the Democratic convention, the Black community was pushing back, saying, no, we're not automatically going to go one way or the other. And kind of what you're hearing today is any voter wants to have their vote earned. What do you think is going to happen kind of with such a compressed timeline? Would this conversation be different if it had been like a longer lead, a longer time to get to know the top of the ticket? Or is it just this frustration has just been mounting over election cycles? It's going to take some bigger action for people to feel they're engaged or part of the process, really, I guess. I
think when I ran for Supreme Court, because I started with grassroots and organizations, I would have thought that, these questions was things that, would have been answered a long time ago. But what became very apparent to me was that they've been having this conversation. We just have not put it at a level of priority for them. So it really doesn't matter that it's the top of the ticket. This was going to have a conversation if Biden was still in the top of the ticket. It wouldn't have mattered. I think what matters to them is nobody speaking to them and nobody speaking to the concerns that they are raising. And it is an airspace. There's no commercials that are dedicated to their commitment to, transforming communities. There's no commercials talking about we're going to transform and build better schools, build better economic hubs so that, Black businesses can thrive. Yes, you talk about giving tax credit, but to get tax credit, you got to have money to get the credit. And so, where is the investment? Where is the commitment? And for places like Milwaukee that are struggling with, poverty, drugs, interconnectionality, and access to opportunity, they don't see there as a bridge anywhere. Their children are suffering, the healthcare infrastructures are struggling, and they just don't see an economic bridge anywhere. And when you don't see a bridge to anywhere, then you don't see the need to really participate in the process whatsoever, because it never comes back to honor what that commitment meant. And so just knocking on doors with groups and just having people just feel hopeless. And even in the space of all this economic wealth and mobility, for people to still, 2024, to feel hopeless doesn't mean that they don't hear any echoes for anything from either party. So I think it's not there's going to be a defection. I think the fear, and rightly so, is this idea that people will just say, I'm just going to stay home because it doesn't matter.
Yeah. Judge Mitchell, we've talked a lot about the community here, and I think we can continue to do that. One thing I want to kind of introduce is maybe like the politics, the small p politics. And curious, I know you're in a nonpartisan position and understand that is a part of your public profile. But I just, as a resident, I imagine you have been observing both of the political parties. Talk a little bit about the Democratic Party, talk more Governor Evers. Tammy Baldwin is obviously up for a Senate race. I'm curious about your perspective on the Republican Party in the state. And I'll tell you what my view is. It seems like there's a bit of a fissure in the party between the more, kind of Trump base of the party that is animating the party right now, and maybe more establishment Republicans. I think about the state speaker, Robin Vos. I believe he's still in that in that space, and there was a lot of pressure on Robin Vos to like change some of the election laws. And there was a lot of internal pressure in the Republican Party. You've got Ron Johnson, who's a very, in the last decade has really kind of moved to the right as somebody, how he's seen in the state, but, ran a very successful race against Mandela Barnes a few years ago. But just kind of curious about your view as someone who is in a nonpartisan position on the state Republican Party and the state of the Republican Party in the state of Wisconsin.
I think the key thing I had to be able to assess as a nonpartisan, race person who is nonpartisan and had to go in these races was that, Wisconsin is not a racist state. You just have people who feel like they are not being heard. And so the Republican base here that is being mobilized and kind of energized by Trump are the same people who, for the most part, are struggling with around family values. So the idea, like, my good friend, Dr. Kathy Kramer, when she wrote her book, and she talked about, the coffee shop conversations around how are people hearing and what are people hearing? A lot of Republican families that talk about family values. They talk about school. They talk about school choice. They talk about the ability for them to be able to have conversations and dictate what their children learn and not having somebody superimpose upon them, pronouns and gender identity, and they don't even have a chance to have those conversations with their families. So when I'm sitting down with Republicans, whether they are moving more toward the right or the center, the Republican Party is trying to find the balancing point between groups who just feel like that even the Republican Party is not listening to them and not standing up for their traditional values, for which they just, it's not that, I'm not, a lot of the families I talked to, they weren't racist. They just wanted voice in what was happening. And they just thought that every party was not choosing to listen to them. And they were trying to find a way for somebody who will be able to stand up for these values that are important to them. And so that's why I think that the nature of the politics in Wisconsin, especially Republican Party, are trying to find that right balance. But I can tell you that there's been, in many ways, a rejection of that traditional Republican, stance toward this, what we call more Trump. And you can see the signs in Dane County. I think him coming to Wisconsin, especially to Waunakee, was a signal to them that they are important.
You mentioned that to me a few weeks ago. Yeah, can you talk a little bit about that, how rare it is for Republicans to go into Dane County? And you said Trump visited Dane County recently, right?
Yeah, he came to Waunakee. And, that is a growing suburb of, in Dane County, and that growing suburb of families. I mean, that's what I mean when I say that they wanted to see that echo, and he came to them, and he is a rural but yet growing progressive community in that area. So it's a mix of just different types of families. But the fact that he came, signaled to them that they are important, and they have responded in ways in many different election cycles since I've been there over the last 20 years I've never seen before. I mean, signs and, big signs, they just out. Whereas before they may have been hidden, now they're out, and they are letting their commitment and their dedication to their voice be heard and echo this election cycle.
Judge, you raise an interesting thing and kind of putting all those pieces together. He is going after non-traditional, it wasn't an area that traditional Republicans would go and campaign in. He's knocking on every type of door. And you're talking about people feeling heard. Do you think it's going to come down to, and you raised all these good issues, is it going to come down to the economy, or is it going to be a series of other things that maybe ultimately drive them these last few weeks?
I think it's going to come down to the values. I think it's all about values. I think the families' value pieces are, seemingly in a cultural conflict. And I think that is what they're listening to. I think, economy is important because they want to be able to, live. But at the end of the day, if we can be able to make sure that whomever is speaking to these groups speak to the idea that it's not just one single issue that we'll focus on. We really are going to make sure a commitment for your families to be supported, for your communities to be rebuilt, for, whether you're rural or urban, both of them are struggling right now, right? So farmers are losing their land and urban centers are losing their opportunities. So who speaks to those things, I think will be the ones that will be able to lead, our nation for the next 4 years. The group that fails to be able to put together a message that coalesces around those things will be the group that will find themselves in the minority.
Judge, if I could real quickly, you just made me think about it. So what does give you hope? What are you excited about that you've seen maybe this cycle or recently, looking ahead?
I'm hopeful that regardless of how people vote, the fact that people are waking up to have these conversations to me is exciting, right? The fact that people are engaged, that people are passionate, they're putting up signs, they're having these conversations. To me, that is the essence of what I want to see in our democracy, because a good democracy doesn't exist if everybody just kind of decides to let the elite or whomever run tables. It is about everyday people standing up and saying, this is what I want, this is what we need. And whether we're talking about school board races or city council or county exec or Dane County or mayors or governors, people are engaged, they are woke, and they want to be able to let their voices be heard one way or the other. And to me, that is the essence of hope. That is why, when I went down to Selma by myself to walk the bridge, and I went down by myself to see the march, that's what people were fighting for, was the hope that people will be engaged and they will walk and they will vote and they will give the voices to be heard. And then when I see that happening, and when I see young people even mad and being angry, to me, that's hope. Because now they're waking up to this understanding that their voices are essential and they're important and they're willing to fight for it. And to me, that is a hope.
Leslie, I know we're coming down to our final minutes here, and Judge Mitchell will promised to get you out of here quickly. I've got a question for you about the Senate race in the state that, we talked a little bit at the top of the ticket and just overall politics. You've got Tammy Baldwin, the incumbent Democratic senator, going against the Republican challenger, Eric Hovde. My general orientation to that race is that I think Baldwin, kind of outrunning maybe the top of her ticket, has been traditionally performing well up until this point. It's maybe starting to tighten. Now, maybe just folks kind of coming home, right? Wisconsin was never going to be a blowout race in one way or another at the Senate level, but just kind of curious as to your read and your assessment of that Senate race right now, and if there's anything that our conversation didn't capture to this point about that race.
No, I think the Senate race creates a space for us to ask, how we will continue to run, right? I think when Mandela Barnes was running against Ron Johnson, it elevated the conversation about what Senate meant. And I think Tammy Baldwin's race with Hovde really is a continuation of that Mandela Barnes, Ron Johnson race, because it allows for the community to continue to be educated. The gift of Mandela Barnes was that he brought Senate down to people. Whereas before, it was like a high conversation that people didn't even think it was important. But the fact that he ran and the way he ran with his white sneakers on and, and all of the stuff that he went through, it made people say, even this race is important. So I think, it may be playing in the national politics kind of funny, but I think in Wisconsin, Tammy Baldwin will have an opportunity to have this conversation because somebody like Mandela Barnes brought the conversation to people in a way that they understand why these races are so significantly important for the long-term success of our democracy.
Leslie,
I couldn't have been said better. It couldn't have been said better. I think that's that kind of ability and skill to kind of bring everybody to the table and make everybody feel welcome. That I call it the engraved invitation. Your voice is so valuable to what I'm trying to do to serve. That is just a skill that I think is the reason a lot of us got into this business, and trying to understand elections and government and service. So it's really great to hear you put it there. My favorite question at the end of these podcasts is, on election night, what are you going to be watching to kind of give you an indicator of what kind of night it'll be for your state?
Well, obviously, I'll be looking at the Wisconsin State Journal on my phone. And I have the YouTube TV, so I'm gonna have like 5 channels operating at the same time. So I'm gonna make sure
you'll have CBS on too. I know
CBS is on.
I'm definitely going. That's definitely gonna have CBS right there, baby, right there on the middle of the screen, along with our local people streaming it. Just trying to make sure we have up-to-date data and eating my popcorn.
There you go.
And praying.
Well, look, Judge Mitchell, we know that you squeezed us in between a lecture and some other responsibilities, and so grateful for your on-the-ground perspective. The people of Wisconsin are clearly well served by you. So thank you for your service and thank you for your insights. And we look forward to seeing how things go in the Badger State as we come down the final stretch here. But again, for our viewers and our listeners, this is the Honorable Judge Everett Mitchell of Dane County, Wisconsin, and he's joined us for the latest episode of Crosstalk Politics, where I am Joel Payne, and I'm joined by Leslie Sanchez. Leslie, until next time, we'll talk
Till
to
next time.
our folks soon. Okay? Take care.
Thank you both.